squirrel friend, and welcome to Haydn Behind the Music Stand. I'm your host, Patty Ryan, and with me is Ian Snyder, who is a freelance violinist and private teacher in the Twin Cities, performing as a sub with the Minnesota Orchestra and Minnesota Opera, touring Broadway shows and other various musical acts, one of which was recording with Prince. And we'll be talking about landscaping. Welcome, Ian. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I met you through winning a local concerto competition for an orchestra that you were actually the concertmaster of. And I met you through this rehearsal process. And I knew that you were actually a professional musician in the area, and I was new to the scene. So I was kind of looking for friends or looking for someone that's at least similar age, similar generation. And I was just so grateful to have you there as my rock in the middle of performing the Saint-Saëns Cello Concerto, third movement. You know, I've been forever grateful for especially the words that you said to me prior to performing, because it was getting into my head of, oh man, how am I gonna, can I do this? Is this really, I usually play in string quartets. I'm not really a concerto performer, but it was a fun experience at the end of the day.
That's good. Yeah, we must have kind of known of each other in the same way, because since I had grown up being coached by Artaria, I knew that you were the new cellist, but we had never met. And so Your reputation kind of preceded you. And I wasn't even sure if you knew that I was a professional musician. And the thing that kind of made that experience of getting to know you so interesting is in the rehearsals, the soloists are in and out so fast that I don't think we ever got to socialize.
That's true.
So it felt kind of anonymous, and the orchestra was having such a hard time following. Mm-hmm. And so there was this thing where like I was trying to just convey security.
Yes.
And it was kind of this funny
and
thing.
You
like,
very
how
much
do you
did.
do that? It's an interesting way, like knowing that there's so much chaos. But like, how can you play in a way that gives somebody a feeling of security? Because I think it's a lot about following, but you almost have to give enough definition that there's still something for you to kind of sit on.
Yeah.
And it was this thing, I'm like, she probably has no idea who I am, but I just want this person to kind of feel like she has a little pillow.
Oh my God, that's a perfect way of explaining how that felt, because that's exactly how I felt. Was, oh my God, thank you so much for reaching out, because it's already challenging enough to put yourself out there in front of an orchestra and play and not mess up, right? Mm-hmm. But then it's a whole other level of the chamber music side of things, to play with orchestra and make sure that you're with the orchestra too, you know? So it very much felt like that you are my rock in that situation. So thank you so much for that.
You're so welcome.
And from there, I got to know other of your friends who ended up being my friends, and then that's how I'm now part of the friend group, I'm assuming.
Yeah, which is
the
so
little
great.
security came out.
Because the thing is, I knew that you were with Artaria, and I kind of had this thing where I was like, so does she want to hang out with like the other people our age, or is she like, she's big league now? And no. I was like so delighted. I was like, oh, she's this awesome person. So that was just really cool.
Yeah, and it's just been a lot of fun also bonding over RuPaul's Drag Race together. And I've had a huge learning curve, but have so much affection for all the drag queens and RuPaul for making the show. But it's been a lot of fun to always gossip about what's going on. Yeah.
It is. I think it's done all these things for me in terms of kind of like my personal journey and personal views. But during a pandemic, it's kind of nice when there's something external that we can all bond over and gossip about, because nobody's really telling like their vacation stories or about all these things that we went out and did in town. Yeah. And so like, that's the big event.
Yeah. Are you ready for some Spitfire questions?
Let's do this.
Okay. Mahler or Bruckner?
Mahler.
Debussy or Ravel?
Debussy.
Cats or dogs?
If
Neither?
I want to make the podcast host happy, I should say cats. But the truth is dogs.
That's okay. I love dogs too.
I like that sort of unconditional love kind of thing. I think I bring enough complication to the table that I don't need a cat to also be complicated.
I mean, I understand. I do love dogs. One day I really hope to have a corgi, but we'll see how that happens. Yeah. Appetizers or dessert?
Appetizers. I have actually gone on dinners where there's like a set menu, and I get them to give me 2 appetizers instead of a dessert.
Oh, wow.
Or like 2 appetizers instead of the appetizer and the dessert.
Sparkling or still water?
Sparkling.
This is the fan favorite question. Alternate universe musical instrument?
I think I'd play cello.
Yes!
I was trying to decide if that was like a sycophant answer, but that's always been the thing. Like, you make it all the way into violin and then suddenly realize you really love the sound of cello. And I think also, like, you spend years with an instrument, like, up on your shoulders,
yeah,
under your neck with the sound of it right against your ears. And just the idea of that sort of downward physicality of cello and being able to hear the sound more in the space, I think would be really amazing to spend some time on.
Okay, I'll teach you. We'll trade swap lessons and I'll learn violin. Early bird or night owl?
Both. And I'm an absolute zombie in the middle of the day. Like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I always take like a 20-minute nap.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. I think it's just sort of a weird
a napper
alien thing. Yeah. a nap connoisseur. Maybe I'm like Spanish or something and I'm I should be having a siesta.
Yeah. Pandemic guilty pleasure?
Antiques.
Oh.
So I moved into my house coming up on 3 years ago, and it's from 1909 and has all this amazing woodwork in it. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to kind of honor the time period of the house without getting too museum-y. Mm-hmm. And there's an amazing amount of online antiques galleries. Wow. And, a lot that they do to kind of let you see like the size and scope of what you're buying, or to kind of get a look at the exact color. And so, I'm kind of going with guilty pleasure because it's like, I think a little bit born out of the pandemic boredom, but you kind of start snooping around and finding these ways to curate the spaces around you. And I think like there's something also kind of natural about it in the pandemic because we spend so much time inside. Mm-hmm. And so just trying to find ways to make the environment around me feel comfortable and
cozy,
homey.
Yeah,
cozy is exactly it.
Do you have a resource for anyone who might be interested in antiquing themselves online?
I would actually say you should start locally, I think, because you can get such a wide range and see things up close. And then if you start to feel like there's something very particular that you want, then you can start to go more of this kind of search engine route. I would say my favorite is architectural antiques in Northeast Minneapolis. It's actually less of like the kind of like furniture and like dishes and stuff. I've bought 2 light fixtures from them, and they're like, it's just so much more interesting than what you would ever get at Target. And I think even if you're not trying to retrofit, it's just these older things have so much character. There's even like old industrial things, or like lights taken out of train stations, or lights taken out of old movie theaters. You could buy like seating from movie theaters. So there's all these amazing things that you just never think of when you think of kind of your grandma's antiques.
Right.
Because it's not just lots of little pieces. It's just like a fun place to nose around. Like, even if you didn't want to buy anything, it would just be a cool experience.
Yeah, awesome. Favorite professor shout out?
I'm going to say my first violin teacher, Yuri Merzhevsky, who was not a professor per se, but we'll probably get into this in musical origin, but I had such a late start that even though I really loved all of my subsequent teachers, I feel like he was the only person who could have done what he did for me at that time.
Yes.
Because, he came out of the Soviet school where lessons have no real length. They just kind of go until you feel like you've covered everything. I remember my mom calling, and she got the tuition rate for a lesson, and she was like, oh, well, how long is that for? And he was like, well, as long as we need. And I think to a Minnesotan mother, that's a little bit anxiety inducing, but she's also a very adventurous person. So she kind of went for it. And it turns out that meant 90 minutes minimum, and tended to be more 2-hour lessons. And then we all just kind of built this really great relationship, and he would invite me to stay and practice after my lessons while he'd fix dinner. And he would just sort of pop back into the room when he heard something going wrong in practice.
Oh.
So there was this whole thing of not just getting musical ideas in a lesson, but also having this how to practice coaching that really, just gave me so many resources, and I think really allowed me to hit the ground running.
I was going to say jumpstart. Totally.
Yeah.
We have very similar stories in that way then, because I also had a teacher, also Russian, that had this blanketed rate, and the lesson would last at least 90 minutes, if not 2 hours or 3 hours or something. Yeah, it's like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing, but I guess that was a thing.
Right.
Okay. Most inspired musical hero of any genre?
I'm going to say Jesse Norman.
Oh, okay.
I think, like, if we could sing like that,
Yeah.
we wouldn't play instruments.
I suppose you're right.
There is just something so, like, rich and lush. And, like, also as a string player, I have to say, like, really full of true pitch in her voice. It doesn't have that mile wide, you know, send out a search party for the vibrato kind of, or for the pitch and the vibrato kind of thing. It's a really true, honest tone, even though it's also so colorful and so rich. So there's just something very human. I just kind of think, like, when I listen to somebody like that, it's just like, that is just like the essence of what
and the
music
word that
is.
The word that came to my mind was purity too, right? That's kind of what we're all striving for, is that sound. I'm sorry, I'm still laughing at that search party. All right. Most transformative performance experience?
I'm not sure, to be honest, if I can give you one exact one, but I know it would have been this kind of series of performances that I gave as I was finishing up with my college string quartet. So we had a quartet that had played together for when I was actually in pre-college. So it covered their 4 years of college, and then for me, 1 pre-college year, and then 3 of college. And I think it's so rare in college chamber music that people really get to have, like, a true group. I feel like a lot of people kind of float in and out of little groups that get assembled ad hoc. Yeah. So we really got to know each other both personally and also to get that real depth of kind of the Sixth Sense chamber music thing. So by their senior year, it was kind of like the fulfillment of what we had been doing. I mean, we all knew that they were moving on to different things. And so we had a number of performances, but I just know at the end it was kind of like, this is our culmination. And it felt so special playing with these people where you're just so close in every way.
Yeah, that's heartwarming and sad at the same time.
It is, yeah. I look back sometimes and it's kind of like there's so many wonderful things going on now, but you're like, oh wow, one of the most wonderful things in my life is, you know, kind of behind me in that way. And you're like, oh boy, like a reunion quartet would be such an amazing thing.
Yeah. Desert island piece of any genre?
I would go with Mendelssohn Violin Concerto.
Oh.
It kind of it hits a few different bases for me. See, like, my family isn't musical. They were always great about kind of like making music available, but I definitely didn't have anyone telling me like, oh, you know, you should listen to these pieces of classical music, or like these are the standards. Like, I definitely grew up listening to as much to, like, say, Beatles as regular classical music. So it was like when I started like doing my own teenager Googling on the internet, like, what are pieces of music written for the violin, and grabbed a bunch of CDs from the library. And I remember Mendelssohn was the one where I was just transfixed. And it had that almost kind of like addictive kind of thing where you feel your brain just like locking in. I remember like that first movement, which is like 12 or 13 minutes, felt so long. Mm-hmm. It was like this like marathon thing to listen to, but was just so kind of overwhelming in this really beautiful way. All these years later, I still love it. It doesn't get old for me. And Mendelssohn doesn't get enough love because I think he maybe didn't innovate in certain ways, but he just created beauty all the time. And I think his music always wants to communicate. And so I just keep finding those layers of like poetry and lyricism where I just like it's just always kind of singing, always speaking to me as I hear it.
Yeah. Totally. I love that concerto too. And I think it gets a bad rap because a lot of intermediate to beginning advanced students end up playing the concerto, and I think it's just overplayed in unfortunate ways. Yeah. I just think it's such a sparkling, wonderful piece of music that I absolutely agree with you.
Weird thing about music in general, that pieces for like any instrument or even for orchestra that become accessible to students of a certain level, unfortunately just become like, we call it like overplayed, but it's like overplayed in not really great ways, or not at not a very high level,
right? And
then we just sort of write them off, and I'm surprised at how often, you know, I stumble across something as an adult listener. This is kind of random, but like Lalo, like the cello concerto and the Symphony Espagnole are like really interesting, fun pieces, but like they sit within that student reach, and so we just have this, like, oh, it's obnoxious.
Yeah.
So
right.
I think that's unfair.
Yeah.
We could just make it illegal. Like for us, it's like, thou shalt not play Mozart Third Violin Concerto, Bruch Violin Concerto, Lalo Symphony Espagnole.
Until you're in college.
Others. Yeah, like you can't do, even, and Mendelssohn would be that. I think that like, it's thankfully a little bit trickier than some of the others. But yeah, like just don't play Mendelssohn until you can do it right.
Yeah. Agreed.
To me, that says something about music in general, where if the whole point is you're just trying to play the notes, maybe it's not a good piece of music for you.
Yeah.
For even your own benefit, right? Like,
right.
You want to like actually experience the real kind of beauty and interest of the piece and not just be like, well, I survived it.
Totally. Well, you made it through the Spitfire questions. Congratulations. Ian, can you tell me your musical origin story? How did you begin with violin? When did you decide to become a professional musician? And walk me through the steps through your education and professional career to where you are today.
It's very non-linear.
That's okay.
So I don't have a musical family. I am fortunate to have a family who I think really wanted to expose me to a lot of things when I was growing up and was really encouraging about whatever I seemed to kind of find most interesting, most compelling. So my mom's from a small town in North Dakota, and she wasn't exposed to classical music at all when she was growing up. So when she moved to Minneapolis, right before I was born, she's kind of discovering the city and all the things that exist here at the same time that she's a young mother, and there was classical radio, and so she'd kind of just keep that on. And that's sort of our best guess as to how I encountered violin, because like when I was like 5 years old, I was like, Mom, do you know what I want more than anything else in the world? And she's expecting like Playmobil or something.
Yeah.
I was like, a violin. And she was like, how does he even know like what a violin is? Like maybe classical radio, maybe library books. So I was able to start lessons, and I found it really frustrating, and I quit.
Yeah.
And looking back, I know there's these things where like it was really bad teaching situation, and
that's so important to have.
It is. There were just these things where I think I had all this enthusiasm, and I remember like going through like the entire Suzuki book, and the teacher was just kind of like, no, it needs to be like, this many weeks for this song.
Oh, I see.
And let us draw the curtain of charity across that teaching. Yeah. It was so frustrating and discouraging, and I quit, and I didn't come back to it until I was 13. So it was always kind of in the back of my mind as something that I could do, something that I had as this hobby, but like so highly dormant. And I think we still kind of like went to concerts occasionally. So it was more like middle school, there was going to be the orchestra program. And I haven't thought about this, but like somehow around that time, I just started to kind of catch more interest in it. I do know we had gotten comp tickets to some Minnesota orchestra concerts. So I think there was like a little bit more exposure happening at that time. Oddly enough, you asked about like when I realized I wanted to become a professional musician, that almost like happened in tandem with becoming interested in violin or like pursuing violin again.
Oh, I see. So it was around age 13 then.
Yeah, I was like, oh wait, like I'm going to be going to high school and people think about what they're going to do for a career. Boy, like, wait, people do this for a job. Like I'm seeing these orchestra musicians. I'm loving this experience as an audience member. Like, wouldn't it be amazing to do something like that? And so it's kind of like, I better dust off the fiddle. I don't remember exactly where the chicken and egg is in all of that, but I just know it was almost kind of this like second wave of like an incubation period where I was just listening to a lot more music, thinking about what would be possible to do with it, and just knowing that, again, I kind of had this highly dormant hobby. And started getting into it again. I started doing like a little bit of lessons with someone who's in the public schools. You probably didn't know this part of it, but I had gone to Minnesota Sinfonia concerts and knew of Ray shows and asked him if he was taking students. And he said he was full, but for some reason he had this idea that I might do well with his colleague Yuri Mirzhevsky.
Got it.
And so he hooked us up, and
boy, was that a good
decision. It all feels, like just kind of total guardian angel kind of thing.
Ray Shows, for anyone who might not know, is my first violinist in my quartet, the Artaria String Quartet, but could proceed.
Yeah. So Yuri was just so amazing. We had talked about some of the things with teaching style in your first questions. It was the perfect hybrid of like the most dry, excruciating things and also like a ton of inspiration. Because what we started with was these like Russian technical exercises that he photocopied for me. It was just like dropping and lifting the left fingers. You know, and just open strings, many open strings, just like whole bows on the A string, and just talking about like awareness of just like flexibility and looseness in the joints and the softness in your muscles, harnessing arm weight. So it was like finger drills and open strings. But at the same time, I also remember at my first lesson that he sent me home with an armful of these like VHS tapes of the old masters. And and it was so funny because I remember in our meeting like saying like, my name's Ian and I want to do this and I want to become a professional violinist. And he was just kind of like, no, that's a bad idea. It's a very difficult, demanding career field. Hardly anybody succeeds at it, and you're fairly old. But
at age 13?
Well, I mean, right, that's ancient. You're a geriatric violin lessons.
Right.
But here's the funny thing. I think at the time I felt so overwhelmed by what initially felt kind of discouraging. But I think that really said more about how he saw the career field than how he saw what a person can do with music in their life. Because he gave me this stack of VHS tapes and he said, take this home and listen to all these players and watch them. And he's like, you can play like them. You just have to crave it. You have to crave playing like them and just yearn to discover what it is they're doing.
Yes.
Like, find out what they're doing and do it. I mean, that's a pretty powerful contrast to boy, you should think twice about a music career. And also like, well, we're going to do open strings. So it's open strings, but also being exposed to this amazing heritage of playing. And I think he knew that if there was this kid on his doorstep who was really serious, that it was going to have to be both of these things. That like we were going to have to be so fastidious because we were missing some of this physical imprinting that you can do like on a 4-year-old with their bow arm or whatever, but that it was also going to have to be inspiring. And I think he also just had this like beautiful musical appetite. When I heard him perform, like he could play and finish and there'd be like just dead silence afterwards because you feel so spellbound. It was really engaging, it was really communicative. So I think he almost couldn't help but make teaching and lessons really musical. Like he'd always really stretch me with repertoire because we needed to accelerate so quickly, but then also get down to like, what is this finger doing? What is this joint doing? It was so meticulous just because everything had to be done well.
Yeah, from the ground up, you really had to fix all those specific things that maybe when you're a younger student, those get fixed later, right? So he had kind of a fresh slab of marble and he was chipping away.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I've struggled with the downside of not having a start when you're 4. But I'll say this, like, what a gift to be taught so well from the beginning.
Yeah.
The other thing that occurs to me is that in my teaching, I remember so many things about the basics. It's not blind instinct for me. And so it really allows me to pass that on to my students. Yeah. And frankly, I believe I'm passing on even like beginning violin info that is at like artist level. Because I got like how to hold the bow, how to draw the bow from a real artist. And, not a puppy mill.
And I can absolutely confirm that as someone who's had the pleasure of coaching your students. I mean, they are so well set up. Great job. Great teaching.
Thank you. Yuri died when I was 15. He had a heart attack.
Wow.
So that relationship, that mentorship had been kind of like what violin and what music was to me. My youth symphony conductors, Manny and Claudette Laureano, were like really caring and really encouraging. So they actually hooked me up with Georgia Flazanis, who was the Minnesota Orchestra concertmaster at the time, who didn't teach and kind of made it clear that she couldn't start, especially with someone who needed, more regular attention as a teenager. But I think there was this thing where she was kind kind of this musical life support for me
Mm-hmm.
because there are a lot of great teachers out there, but because what I had felt so special, I just had this kind of like if I can't have that, I don't want anything.
Got it.
And this idea of then getting to study with somebody who is also like a really profound artist. I mean, like a really like deep thinker. I think she really tided me over. And it was a lot of the same things that I appreciate about Yuri, like this real curiosity for musical line, for color. I mean, really just never being passive about spitting out notes and rhythms, but like trying to question what's going on and she's so huge on composer intent. Like, what is the composer trying to say, and how can we realize that?
Yeah.
So I went out to Chautauqua Music Festival and studied with Mrs. Vamos, and she recommended that I go to Sally O'Reilly, and I did. I think it was a really great fit, especially at the time. She gave me this really great new layer of just like technical facility. She's also just a really great analytical problem solver, just kind of lingering things that we hadn't quite worked out from a late start. Got a lot of problems solved. And I think she really helped just with kind of like modeling a thought process for problem solving when you play. And
I mean, already your pedigree is stupendous. Those are all incredible pedagogues, you know? I think you've just been either lucky or asked the right person, or someone saw something in you and suggested someone else. And I don't know, it just sounds like you have really had a great education. Yeah,
I'm so grateful. And I think there's just some like beautiful luck. Sally O'Reilly has this reputation for being such a dragon lady, but I would actually say that like our time together was actually a really good psychological experience for me, like in particular, because I think what she is just totally professional and totally non-judgmental. And so it doesn't mean she's not critical, though. She will just level with you and just be like, here's exactly what I see. Here's exactly what you need to do to fix it.
Got it.
And if you just do it, A, it works because she's a really good teacher, and B, then she has no problem with you, you know? Right. And so I think she taught me to be critical without being judgmental. And so I think having somebody with a very keen ear, like really observant, really, really demanding, but just, it never felt personal. Like that was really helpful for me. So I think that's really great. And I think at that time, I was waking up to a lot of things with what I wanted my life to be. You know, you're kind of leaving childhood, and so lifestyle changes. You're kind of shedding that exoskeleton of what a childhood is and thinking about your adult lifestyle, and you kind of become self-conscious about your life path. And I think knowing that I was approaching the real world was so anxiety provoking, because it was like, oh, I need to be able to play at a level that's going to like make me really competitive. And I think I was still looking at kind of the lens of orchestra auditions, and that in particular kind of had this thing for me where I was thinking like everything has to be perfect, right? Like the goal is just to play in this way that
non-offensive,
like, unimpeachable. Yes, and I think part of that is neurotic, and part of that is we should be wise enough to kind of reject that seductive idea of perfection. But at the same time, I also do believe that that is something that is bred in symphony orchestra culture. I don't think we're really looking for personality. I always hear panel members talk about how they want musicality, they want the phrasing, they want color, they want an imprint. I can think of one audition in particular, and I said, I know who won. I think this person is a phenomenal player. So I'm not asking in any kind of jaded way, but I do want to know, why did you pick them? And one of the panelist members said, that violinist is the one person who didn't make a mistake.
Oh, man.
Prelims, semifinals, finals. And I just thought, like, you are falling right into the trap that you say you don't set. And actually, and another panel member I talked to once said, she was kind of confessing, she said, like, when I coach people for auditions, I ask for all of those things. You know, she's like, I'm really big on like trying to get the style right for Mozart and the style right for Mahler. Sure. And she said, there's something about the curtain where as soon as we aren't seeing like a person anymore, she's like, I just find myself listening for like, oh, that note was a little out of tune. Oh, there was like a scuff on that note. Oh, in that strand of so many spiccato notes, like one of them didn't speak. So I think sometimes we overemphasize cleanliness, and I think it can create this impression in young musicians that the best thing they can do is play in a way where there are no complaints.
Right.
I was really actually uncertain about continuing by the time I got to the end of college.
Yeah.
And I had this real stroke of luck where I had done an exchange term at Salzburg Mozarteum. It was a pretty short little jaunt, but I came back feeling really energized because I just loved being someplace completely different. It was really fun and really stimulating. Sally O'Reilly kind of sensed that I had been bitten by that bug. So she did a guest professorship at the Academy of Performing Arts in Prague during one of my last couple of years there. So she was gone for a few weeks doing master classes and lessons. And she came back and she said, there's this man, Ivan Strauss, and I think this is one of the best violin studios I've heard in Europe. She's like, I know that you are kind of interested in this abroad thing, so maybe you want to try that out. And so I mailed him one of my recital DVDs, and it was really funny because it was I just got an email one morning where he was just Dear Ian, your playing is at the level we accept. Please, remain in touch as you have, you can hear, as you hear from your other auditions. And I got to this point where I was just really feeling so uncertain about continuing. Well, here, let me digress for a second. Yeah. I also had always wanted to do the backpacking around Europe or around the world for 9 months or a year. And I knew that you can't do that if you have to practice a musical instrument.
Right.
Anyway, so I thought I'm really uncertain about continuing, but I know I won't regret it if I go abroad and I give myself that international experience, living a different way, living in a different place. I know that I'm going to get some of that kind of backpacker view, slow drip, and it'll be kind of osmosis day to day, and it's going to be really up close and detailed. And I know that that's a cultural experience that is going to be really meaningful to me. And so if I can do that and keep my playing up at the same time, at least I just won't regret it down the road. And the funny thing is I was thinking and this is where I'm going to go get polished.
Oh, okay.
As a Czech teacher, but trained in Moscow, I'm he'll be a stickler, and I'm going to become that unassailable musician that I know is going to give me my best chance at having a career.
Give you that edge. Yep.
In hindsight, I think I was looking for a more intensely zoomed in look at all of the mechanics going on in my playing, but I'm not really sure that it's possible to analyze and communicate at that level of detail. And in hindsight, it's almost what I was looking for was just a silver bullet for ironclad playing, maybe just to make me feel fully in control.
Yeah, I see.
What he gave me instead was a lot of guidance on using natural physical motions to play, and also really persistent requests to deliver a bigger expressive range. At first, I think I was worried that it was so big picture and so musically oriented that it was just going to end up being this kind of soloist type education, and it wasn't going to help me really be prepared professionally. But I think it gave me two really amazing gifts. One is just that he taught me to play in a really proactive and deliberate way. And I think that had the effect of indirectly addressing a lot of the things that didn't feel polished in my playing. So, just something as simple as if you are really using the weight of your arm and you're really harnessing weight and speed together, you're going to have a more even tone. You're not going to crack the sound. And so if you're just worried about preventing yourself from cracking the sound, you'll probably be physically tight and you'll probably do the very thing you're afraid of. Whereas if you just are thinking about pushing and pulling on the string, you'll have a really beautiful sound.
Right.
And then I think where the musical feedback really helped so much is that it got me out of my head in terms of these tiny physical motions and details. And, by really listening for a particular line or a particular color or a particular mood, you sort of physically, intuitively figure out how to get that result. And you're just not stuck on these little motions that, again, I think can actually make you tense and actually make more mistakes. So I think it was really this deliverance from hesitant, cautious playing. And I think I came out more fluent as a result. And the other thing is, I think he just really gave me the gift of just feeling a lot more joyous about music. And it's almost like irrelevant whether that prepares you in a certain way for a career, because if you have some joy and enthusiasm, then whatever you're going to do is going to be sustainable, and you can really keep yourself moving forward into the future.
Totally. Okay, so you're in the Czech Republic.
Right.
How many years did you do there again?
2.
Okay, and then after that, did you go back to the Twin Cities?
I did, yeah. I had such an amazing experience, and I loved it there, and there are still so many people who I keep in touch with. It's right in Central Europe, but it's a country that I think is still trying to recover economically from the Soviet era. Czech Philharmonic, which is one of these kind of like top 10 European orchestras, had like a starting salary. I think they told me about like €1,000 a month.
Oh, wow.
The whole way. My violin professor, when I was going to meet him, I was going to, like pay cash for a violin lesson. I think it was like $25.
What?
So just the economic scale is depressed compared to other European countries, and certainly here. So I think that even though there's a part of me that kind of wanted to continue the fantasy a little bit, I think I knew that if I was going to get traction with a career, it was going to be too hard trying to get myself on my feet there. Mm-hmm. And then I always kind of knew I would try to end up back in Minneapolis. This city explains even a lot of my professional choices, because I never did the orchestra audition circuit, because I knew that livability mattered to me so much. I couldn't be in a city I didn't like. And I kind of this thing where I'm like, boy, I would have to win an audition in like Boston Symphony, Minnesota Orchestra, like Seattle or Oregon, or like San Francisco Symphony. There's like so few jobs, which are already like incredibly difficult to get, but there are so few of them that would actually fit with places where I'm willing to live. And quality of life matters to me way too much to sacrifice that for an orchestra job. For those who don't know Minneapolis, it's an amazingly livable city, I think, because it's like, we have something like 7 lakes in the city proper. And then you have like the Mississippi River, you have Watershed Creek along the south side. The city's created all these amazing like public waterways, public green spaces, so you can be immersed in nature even while you live right in the center of the city. There's just so much with like the arts. I think like theater seats are second to New York City.
Wow,
in the
really?
country.
I didn't know that.
It's crazy. You know, we got like 2 full-time symphony orchestras. It's such a progressive city. I love that Minneapolis is so progressive, but at the same time, it has this kind of like wholesome, almost quaint, like neighborly way of people relating to each other. I think it came first, and I knew that I would make my career around a lifestyle that I wanted to have. And I think because the arts environment is pretty rich, it has allowed me to enjoy this kind of like jack of all trades thing, because there's enough to go around and there's so many really cool avenues here.
And it also brings you so much more variety than just one ensemble. You get to do a recording with Prince, for example.
Yeah, I love that. I think, something I've learned about myself down the road is I think I crave a lot of change and variety. And I think freelance could be stressful for some people, but I think that the novelty really keeps me going.
Yeah, so I guess that's currently you're teaching privately, and I'm sure the pandemic disrupted so much of your freelance work, but I'm hopeful that the arts will come back, and so will Ian's performing.
I hope so too.
Well, Ian, is this a good time to take a break?
That sounds good.
Okay, all right, we'll be right back. Welcome back from the break. So landscaping, was this a pandemic project, or has this been something that has been of interest to you before that?
Both. This was definitely a pre-existing condition. But then what's kind of weird is like, I haven't even had my house for 3 years quite yet, but we've been in a pandemic for the last year. Yeah. So like by the time I kind of got ready to pull the trigger on all of this, it was the pandemic. I remember I was getting ready for it and the pandemic hit, and there were all these things that I thought were totally depressing about what I was going to have to miss out on. But I was like, but that landscaping project is staring me in the face. So now I can just go all in on it.
Yeah.
My mom definitely got me curious about landscaping. It was never something she tried to teach me. I don't think we really even worked in the garden together when I was growing up, but she does have this beautiful garden, and it's a garden that, kind of knowing what I know now, probably kind of fits that like English garden philosophy where it looks totally kind of like spontaneous and wild, but really like requires so much care and intentionality to get it to the point where it actually just looks as though it could have sprung up out of nature.
I mean, that sounds like Mozart to me. I mean,
yeah, right. Because it's just that like organic beauty. And I think that kind of sets the stage for things I realized with gardening and landscaping down the road. Because there's this part of me that has never really been attracted to kind of that quote unquote gardening world. Like when you think about the old ladies getting together at their little luncheons.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of what we think is gardening is sort of this weird, like having your little menagerie of things lined up. And that just like totally turns me off. It doesn't do anything for me at all. Like I've done all this hiking, and that's actually been like a really huge passion for me. That actually was like sort of my close second for like an outside topic. And it kind of hit me how much they really relate, because I've always loved the outdoors so much. But a lot of it for me is just that feeling of being in a powerful landscape.
Yeah. The Bob Ross effect. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it is. Right. No, I mean, right. We find all this beauty in scenery, and it's like, it's aesthetically beautiful, but we feel these things, right? We feel like this centeredness and peace, but also kind of like sometimes like stimulation and excitement. Yeah, so it's sort of like at the same time I was like having this love of the outdoors and landscapes, and also this curiosity about what I could do with my own space. And I found myself just kind of spontaneously drawn to Japanese gardening.
Right.
And one of the things I learned as I read more about it is that Japanese gardening is trying to distill the landscape, kind of capital L, the landscape, into a garden. And so sometimes that's in more abstract or in more concrete ways, but you are trying to evoke your surroundings. And things kind of clicked for me where I'm like, oh, I love the outdoors. I love nature. And I also have this curiosity how I can kind of recreate that. And I keep looking at these gardens and finding them really powerful, and it's because that's exactly what they've been trying to do in their own way. And so I just set out to try to create my own sort of sanctuary or sort of state park space in my own yard.
In this style, how have you started to transform your backyard and front yard to be the Ian State Park?
Yeah.
There must have been some effort to uproot some of the foliage that you had there, right? And I mean, there was inherited previous garden there before that you had to...
So this was the magical thing about this property, is that no one had ever done landscaping here.
What?
There could have been something in like the ancient past that was taken out, but it was a total blank canvas when I got it. And I was so excited because I knew I didn't have to clean up anybody else's bad decisions.
Wow.
I mean, there is that blank canvas anxiety, but I really had the appetite to tackle it. I think I've done things that are more, let's say, big picture, and some things that are more granular. So I wanted to create like a sense of enclosure. So I realized, for example, that like if you put some things at like the front of your yard near the sidewalk, as you look out from the house, you actually have almost like a little bit of a, not quite a tree line, but kind of a green line to kind of make you feel a little bit sheltered from the sidewalk in front of you. That you can also dissolve a lot of the really geometric lines on these square houses and garages with greenery. So you can kind of dissolve that man-made world a little bit and kind of feel like you're immersed in this natural environment. Yeah, I think that sense of immersion is really big. A little bit more specifically, like one of the things that I really like from Japanese gardening is always avoiding symmetry. So you have things, trying to create wandering paths or arranging things kind of in like more triangular patterns rather than that kind of twos, like one thing next, nothing like mirrors another thing. So having things kind of be be off balance, but in this way where they all kind of hang together almost like a mobile. That relates over to that English garden idea, where if you plan it meticulously enough, then you can create this sense that it might have just grown up out of nature.
Right.
I think speaking even more concretely, we associate gardening so strongly with flowers, but flowers only last for like a week or two, and that plant is going to do something else for the entire rest of the year. So for me, choosing like new friends for our landscape that have some kind of really interesting form or habit, and having diversity, right? Some things that are more columnar, some things that are weeping, some things that are mounding or vase shaped, and then kind of just within those forms, things with interesting bark or trunks, interesting branch structure, interesting foliage, things that change even. So I have some Japanese maple, and they have like one color in the spring, they'll settle into another color in the summer, and then you get the beautiful autumn blaze.
Right.
That really makes you feel like you're in this very alive landscape, and I think that makes it more like a true landscape in nature.
Yeah.
When it kind of goes through this flow rather than just being like, oh, we've got some green shoots, and now the flowering display happens, and now it's just back to green, and then it'll die in autumn.
Right. And that was actually going to be one of my other questions. So I grew up in San Diego, so plants are evergreen there, you know, for the most part, unless you really kill something. But in Minnesota, obviously there's the seasons. Does that come into play with your planning of your landscaping?
That's a really great question. Maybe it would if I was a little bit wiser. There's a part of me that like wants to create exactly what I want, and if it has to die back in the winter and look like crap, that's okay.
Because that's just what happens in the winter.
Right, exactly. I think I think when you grow up here, you're conditioned to that. You just know the inevitability of winter dormancy, and so I think you just maybe kind of learn to accept like this is something that's going to be beautiful and amazing for part of the year, and then I have to accept that it's transient. There are actually things like that, even so like Japan has a much more temperate climate than we do, but that is a part of their gardening. They have the cherry blossoms, which are so delicate. You can have years where like the entire bloom is just ruined by like a windstorm, and they're aware of that. Like there's poetry about how the fragility of the cherry blossoms is like life. Beautiful things are ephemeral.
Yeah.
Now that said, there are things that you can do to kind of mitigate that in northern climates. Conifers are probably the best thing. You can keep color year round with conifers. I also have a crabapple in the front yard that I actually do have a Japanese weeping cherry, but crab apples are a better substitute for the upright cherry trees because they're much cold hardier than the upright Japanese cherries. And this one produces it's like these beautiful little rich red ornamental fruit, and they actually persist during the winter. So there is kind of this beautiful thing where you can look out and see this black bark, and then it's almost like these little jewels hanging from the tree. And they just freeze and stay there for the winter. So I think in the big picture, you accept that a lot of it is fleeting, but then you can find these little accents where you'll get tree bark interest or like a fruit that persists or evergreen foliage. To have those little glimmers, a lot of those colors look so beautiful with the snow too. Like that's you know, people from other places probably just they look at snow as such an inconvenience, but when it settles here in those like beautiful blankets, that's part of the landscaping too. And I think that especially is like, are you in it for the kind of grandma's flower garden thing, or are you in it because you have this love of nature and you want to be surrounded by that? I mean, for me, it feels equally beautiful to have the snow cover up the gardening beds and to look out over that when I'm stuck inside.
As I even asked the question, I realized that, you know, I knew the answer already, which was, well, if your mantra is to distill the outdoors and put it outside your house, that is the outdoors. And so you have to be true to the seasons in that way.
That's so true. It's a hard lesson to learn, but it's really true.
Yeah. What is the most surprising thing that you learned in your research of landscaping?
The thing that is the hardest for me is trying to plan a landscape when everything you plant is immature, because it's all going to grow. I mean, sometimes many multiple times its starting immature size. Yeah. And so you have to plant in a way where things look very sparse and kind of adolescent, and you're always having to kind of project forward what you think it's going to be like when it fills in. That's the trade-off of not inheriting somebody else's landscape. You get the freedom of creating exactly what you want, but it is immature. So I've been surprised at how many things I thought I was really smart about and then ended up having to transplant after like 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
Not even 15 years later, but right away realizing that I had made some dumb mistakes with how things were going to fill in and what the proportions would be. I actually started using SketchUp, which is like an architectural software, in order to look at the landscape with the sizes of mature specimens and then basically plot out like how many feet away from the house I was going to put this, or how this thing can sit next to this other thing. And you plant them and you look at it and you think, this looks so sparse, but I feel really at home here. And so I'm hoping that I'll, be in the same place a while down the road, and you'll see it really become that. I think that's kind of an irony, is that here I'm professing this love of landscapes, but I won't get that here for quite a long time. And in the meantime, it is a little bit more of a menagerie where you kind of walk around to all your little buddies and you're kind of like, okay, I have to kind of research your care and do all the right things for you so that this develops into something that feels a little bit more timeless.
Yeah. That actually is funny, because I was going to ask you what is the most challenging part of landscaping. And it sounds like you answered both questions with that one answer, right?
Yeah. I think the other thing too is every plant is different. Every yard is different. You can't crave a formula for how to do things. The right amount of sunshine and rain, all these things are very organic. I've always loved Japanese maple, and they're really hard to keep alive in a harsher climate here. Across the world, people have this whole thing about like how Japanese maple are so difficult to keep alive, to maintain. And it's like, no plant is difficult to maintain. Japanese maple are from a certain ecosystem, and they taught themselves how to grow and thrive in that ecosystem. They are a strong and resilient plant. They taught themselves how to live a certain way. We're the ones asking them to live in a climate that doesn't really match their original one. So no wonder we have to do these fussy things with soil or with winter protection in order to try to make them work as guests in our home.
Yeah. Oh, that's a nice way of putting it. Oh, poor tree. But totally right. Yeah, I love that that's your perspective on it, rather than, how come you're not working for me? It's, no, I need to take care of you. And I'm asking asking you to extend farther than you're comfortable naturally with. Yeah, and adaptive.
Exactly.
What is a plant that you aspire to be able to have in your landscape? Or like an item or some sort that you would love to have at some point?
Ooh, okay. So if I'm doing it right, then the answer to that question is like something that I already have, but at maturity.
Okay.
So one of the things I'm thinking about is I got the Japanese weeping cherry in my backyard, and they are always grafted. They're grafted surgically onto a straight trunk of a different, like kind of like a wild cherry tree in order to get height. So they're grafted about 5 to 6 feet high, and then the branches start to weep down, and they build height eventually as some of those arching branches will just arch a little higher, and then they may have another shoot that comes off of them that arches a little bit higher. So at the moment, the tree has this like Sideshow Bob look, where it's just like the one pole with these little umbrella branches. But I've seen these ones that are like 900 years old in Japan, where they look like clouds. They have that kind of multi-lobed look, and it's just like so beautiful seeing this cloud of flowers. And I'd say the same goes for some of like the maples that I have, or some of the conifers, different pine, dreaming about what they can turn into. Like, so hopefully I have the plant already.
Got it.
And it's just about waiting for it to mature. I do also have a list of plants that I would love to grow if global warming progresses and we continue to... because, I mean, the thing is, this has already happened. There are things that you could not grow in Minneapolis 20 years ago that you can now.
Yeah, I know.
I would love for it to not advance any further. I hope that's the case. But if it does, there are some things that grow in Chicago that I would love to grow here. And if that becomes our climate, then I'm going to make lemonade.
Yeah, I know, right? I know. It's like such a double-edged situation. Well, I really look forward to watching your garden grow over the years that our friendship will continue.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I hope that you continue to be a part of it.
Ah, yeah, of course. Let me know if I can come over and help in any way, too.
I mean, so at this time, the spring blossoming is about to kind of go crazy in Minneapolis. So there should be some fun viewing before too long.
Okay, cool. Nice. Can I ask you two final questions?
Yes, you sure can.
What is one piece of advice you would tell your younger self about entering and pursuing a music career?
I think if I could know that it was going to work out financially and in a way that would actually make me feel really fulfilled, I think it would remove that anxiety over professional failure. That I don't think that particular type of anxiety helped me thrive as a musician.
Yeah.
I think it would have opened me up to actually be more enthusiastic about practicing and, you know, all the different little ways that you develop on your instrument. Sometimes I think that the things that did hold me back were basically just sort of a fear of failure. And so you don't want to invest too much in case it doesn't work out. And then you've given all that time for nothing.
Right.
But if I could go back and just be like, it is totally going to work out. I mean, it's work. It's not always just fun.
Yeah.
But like, you are going to be fulfilled by this. I just think that would have totally like made my
change the script
all the stronger. I think I'd be even more proficient now.
Totally. Wow. What I wish I could have told myself that too as a younger version of me. I was a little too tense sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, so I think so many people sit in that place
where
like just the fear of failure or fear of what it's going to look like to other people as we fail really hold us back.
Well, I think the starving artist thought or mantra saying plagues us and puts us at a disservice to, have this assurance and confidence to go forward in our field.
I agree. I also think it's also like a dumb conception because I remember being afraid of dating and knowing I was going to have to say that I was kind of, that like the starving artist. And people are like, whoa, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
People find it really interesting. Even like people who didn't know anything about classical music just thought it was a really interesting thing. And I think also I was surprised at the number of kind of funny comments I got from people where I think they resent their 9-to-5 and they realize that they're sitting with somebody who's doing something that compels them professionally.
Right.
And they just think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So that would be a thing for younger self. Like, hey, people are going to actually think it's pretty cool that you're a musician. So, like, you don't have to do your career in a certain way in order to save face.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay. And even if they did, like, you should still be doing it for yourself anyway.
Absolutely. My second question. As we enter a post-pandemic world, what elements of your musical pandemic life would you want to continue, and what would you want to shed?
I love your question, but I have to not answer it exactly the way you asked it.
Okay.
I have had a non-existent pandemic musical life. It's felt like a sabbatical for me. I think I had this realization early on that trying to replicate the things that were really meaningful for me virtually was not going to be fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just wanted to spend this time doing other things that made me feel really fulfilled.
Yeah.
And then go back into music when I could participate in it fully.
I think it makes sense to, if I remember your pattern of your origin story, you are all in or not at all, and it's on the terms that you want it to be on. No, but in like a good way. You're not actually stretching yourself further than what's genuine to you. I don't know.
I think that's true. I think that's really true. I mean, that's even the thing with like the early start on the violin is I wish I could have done it earlier, but I know at least that every time I ever chose to take the instrument out of the case, it was because I chose to do it. So I got the benefit of that motivation, and I also get that peace of mind for kind of my life narrative, knowing that it was always something I chose.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who's a really great pianist, and we've done a lot of duo playing during the pandemic. And I think like that's the one pandemic thing that has been a catalyst for kind of my lens going forward, where it's like this immediate and spontaneous experience with somebody who you really like and who you play well with, and we're playing exactly the music we choose. And so in a way, like the part of your question that I'm latching onto is more of like looking back at my pre-pandemic musical life and thinking about which of those things I want to take forward with me or not. And I really want to prioritize the things that involve those ingredients, like people who I really like and enjoy playing with, music that I want to play. And I think also, this doesn't apply to the pandemic now, but like past concerts where we've just shared the music in a very direct way. And I think what doesn't matter to me is like, you know, if the pay's not perfect, that's fine. If it doesn't feel like prestigious in a certain way, that's also fine. I think I would rather just like round up some friends and play chamber music for some people at a church than be like, oh, well, I was on this really prestigious music series, but they made me play with like this jerk and play a piece of music that I didn't want to play.
Right.
Or, you know, there were certain gigs that I've taken historically because of what I perceived kind of the networking power to be, but they sometimes were slogs, and none of them are created equal. So there are some kind of wacky off the wall freelance things that I've totally loved and found so stimulating, and there are just others that aren't. And I think that if it's missing those kind of core ingredients, that's something I want to leave behind.
Yeah, I think that answers that question beautifully. Are there any platforms or websites for our listeners to learn more about you or any upcoming projects?
I do have a website. It's iansnyderviolin.com.
All right. And if you enjoyed listening, be sure to smash that subscribe button wherever you're tuning into this podcast. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts while you're at it. It doesn't need to be long. Your review will help others search for this podcast because of the crazy algorithms, and you'll make Sushi's day. And it's free. Make sure to share this podcast with your friends and family as well. If you want to level up, you can always become part of the Haydn Behind the Music Stand family by donating what you will on our Patreon page at patreon.com/HaydnMusicStand. Our social media handle for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter is @HaydnMusicStand, and we'd love to hear from you at our email haydnmusicstand@gmail.com. Didn't recognize a piece we discussed during the episode? No worries. There's a Spotify playlist with all the music discussed for your convenience. The link is in the description of each episode. Ian, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. It's so good to get to know some of your backstory, and I'm really excited to see how your garden turns out.
Thank you. It was so much fun being here, and it was so much fun just getting the chance to think through all these things. It's pretty amazing.
Sure. And thanks for listening. Say bye, Sushi.
Is the word ephemeral?
We got caught. Okay.
You have to learn your vocabulary before you go on someone's podcast.